G'day from Australia. My name is Ashley Davis. Welcome to my coding live stream. These sessions are recorded live, but I make them available on YouTube later. You're watching me build the Photosphere application while I talk about how I'm doing that. Please feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. You can see my handle on the screen. Before we get to coding, I'll start with the tradition we have here in Australia. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from which I'm broadcasting. I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. So these live stream sessions are to support my book, Rapid Fullstack Development, that you can find at rapidfullstackdevelopment.com. Previous sessions of the live stream can be found on YouTube. Please check the Code Capers channel. Look under playlists. Find the Rapid Fullstack Development playlist, click View Playlist, and you can see all the previous sessions of this live stream and all the work that we've done so far. The code that I'm writing in this live stream is available on YouTube. I always commit and push shortly after I actually record the live stream. So by the time you watch this on YouTube, the code should already be there. You can see there's a bunch of stuff here that we've been through already. At the moment, we're working on test-driven development for the algorithm for the layout of the photo gallery in Photosphere. So this is the repo that I started in the last session. We've created 4 automated tests already in this code repo, and we're going to be creating more today. So I'm in the middle of test-driven development, or TDD as it's known, to create this custom layout algorithm for the Photosphere photo gallery. I can do test-driven development at the moment because I did all my prototyping in previous sessions of live streaming. So I know what I'm doing, I know where I'm heading, and before you do test-driven development, you really have to have a good plan. You have to know what you're doing and where you're heading with your code. So I'm just going to pick up where I left off earlier. Coming back to a coding session after I've had a break, I always start by running the tests. So that's npm test is the conventional way to do that. You can see that it's just running jest. I have got 4 working tests. Now, this is actually telling you that my code is working, how I intended it to work. Well, not really, because in between live streams, I did find a bug in my code. And in a moment, I'm going to show you how I found that and what I did to see that issue. You can just note from this that just having automated tests, doing test-driven development, doesn't prevent you from having bugs in your code that you didn't even know about. You'll often need alternatives. And in this case, the alternative I needed to find that bug was to see visually that the photo gallery wasn't quite working the way that I expected. So I've got my tests running. I will start up the dev server here. So we'll open the web page and we'll get this working visually so you can see what the problem is that I discovered. I'm just going to open Visual Studio Code. Okay, so here we are in the gallery component as I left it last time. The file starts with some test data. And that's what you can see on screen to the left here. It's just the rendering of the test data. But what I want to do is I want to take this back to my more realistic test data, which I downloaded from the Unsplash API many sessions ago now. It's not going to work because I know from the last session, I know that I kind of changed the data format and I haven't updated my data yet. There's this error here about not having a key. And you can see down here what it's talking about. I mean, the 2 places where we need keys, for this rows.map, we've got a key there. Then there's a key there in this kind of list of items here as well. So we do have the keys, but I know that the data format is wrong. I just know this already from the last session because that's where I changed it. And so I know that this kind of field here doesn't exist in my gallery items in my Unsplash data. And I can check that, of course, just by console logging the data that I've loaded in here. Let's have a look at that. So we've got 30 items here in our gallery test data. But you can see the URLs that we're looking for are in the original format from when I downloaded them from Unsplash under this URLs field. And that's where we've got kind of the link to our thumbnail image down here. And that's not what we want. That's not the format that I wanted for my gallery data. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to do a data transformation to get this into the format that I need. And then hopefully we can actually see gallery after that. So I'm mapping over each item in the gallery. And I'm converting it to a new object, and that's going to have what do I need? So I need thumb, width, and height. So they're the things that I actually need. You can see in my kind of data examples here, or to get a reminder, we can have a look at the tests that I wrote in the last session. where you can kind of see what the format of each item looks like here. So I need a thumb, a link to my thumbnail image. Now from memory, that comes from item urls.thumb. We can confirm that later over here if we need to. URLs thumb, yep, that's good. And then I also know that item width just comes from a field directly in the item there, same with the height. So this should be enough to get a data transformation in the format that we need for our test data, so that looks cool. And this allows me to see the problem. All the photos are on one line, and that kind of goes against what I did in the last session. We look at the tests that I've got running here. One of the tests that I've got is items wrapped to the next row on overflow, and that's clearly not working. It was working in the small test data set that I had in there yesterday, so the tests are passing, but it doesn't mean there's not a bug in my code. Now I happen to know where the bug is. When I was prototyping this gallery layout algorithm a couple of sessions ago, I did write some code, and I kind of went and checked how that worked, and I checked that against the code that I've got here in my layout function. So this is the function create layout, which is what I'm using. This is where the algorithm is. So this code here is the algorithm that kind of assigns each gallery item to a row, and it pushes items onto the next row if they overflow the width of the gallery. But the problem is this line of code here, where it's saying if the computed width of the item is greater than the gallery width, then we kind of flow to the next row. That means that if you get an item that is bigger than the gallery width, it's going to overflow, but not if you have multiple items. So this isn't summing up the width of multiple items, which is kind of annoying. So I know what the fix is to this. Like I worked on this when I was prototyping, so I already know that if I do, where is it? I'm computing the current row width down here, and I'm accumulating the current row width. I want to say if the current row width plus the computed width of the item that's about to be added. Now, the problem with this is I'm sort of violating the rules of test-driven development here, which, doesn't really bother me. I'm quite happy to go and fix the test after the fact, but I'm going to try and, stick to proper TDD here. So I'm going to before I fix the problem, I'm going to create a test that fails, and so that fixing the problem will make that test pass. That should be fairly easy to do. What I want to do is I want to show that multiple items don't overflow. And it's a little bit hard to understand here how the items overflow because they're all rescaled. So I'm using a target row height of 200, and it's rescaling each item to have a height of 200, which is subsequently also scaling up the width of each item. To make this a little bit easier to understand, I'm just going to set the height of each item to 200. So there's no scaling that's actually going to happen here now. I'll run my tests in live reload mode so I can see what's going on. Each of the widths here is not going to be scaled, so I can add them up and 240, 640. So the total width of all these items should be 640. It should overflow, and what we're expecting here is that we've got 2 items in the first row, and then the third item overflows. But now that I've tweaked the data, I've just tweaked the data to make the test fail, and it's a simple fix. It's a really simple fix. It's what I just said, where I'm saying I want the current row height, the current row width plus the computed width of the item that's about to be adding. That is greater than the gallery width. Then I'm going to overflow to the next row. So this should fix that failing test. Fingers crossed. Anyway, cool. I love it when things come together like that. So that is a good change. I'm going to commit that before I break anything. I'm going to do a bit of a git diff here just to check changes. Yep, that's good. That's the transformation I did. Related to that as well. This is the actual bug fix. And yep, so that looks good. I'm just making sure that everything that's going in to my code repository is what I intended to go in there, and that I'm not adding new problems. That's the thing, right? That's the reason that you should do self-review and do a git diff and understand what you're committing, is because you don't want to be adding. I'm trying to fix problems. I don't want to add new problems. Let's add all that. Okay. That should be good. What is the next test that I'm going to write? That is the question. I mean, that's the key to moving forward with test-driven development. Really, any kind of development, not even test-driven development. It's like, what is the next simplest thing that I can do to move towards my end goal? Actually, I'm gonna look at this visually again. So I'll just go back to my web page. We'll refresh just to be sure. Check there's no errors in the console here. It's looking good. So my photo gallery, I can see visually now that it's wrapping correctly. Also, let me just double check. Also, all my tests are passing. So at the moment, I'm happy that everything works and that there are no bugs. The next thing to do, of course, is that I want to fill these nasty gaps. So I mean, that's the key thing I'm doing here is fill the gaps so that the photos in the photo gallery, fit as smoothly as I can get them up against the right-hand edge. That means incrementally expanding the height of the row, indirectly expanding the width of each item until they hit the edge. Let's make a new test anyway. I'm going to do that by copying the last test. They're fairly similar. And what am I going to call this test? So, items stretched toward the right-hand boundary. Having a good test name is really important to understand kind of what you're trying to achieve with it. This is complicated because what I want to do is the last row in the photo gallery. See this last one down here. I don't want to stretch this. I don't want to stretch that. I'm going to say this is a little bit of an unwieldy test name, but items not in the last row are stretched towards the right-hand boundary of the gallery. So that's the behavior that we're trying to achieve here. This kind of works, right? This test actually works pretty well already because I'm going to have two items in the first row. I'm going to have, this is the last row. This is the row that's not going to be stretched. So I need to find a way of testing this, that the width of the items here are scaled up. It's going to go beyond 200. So the height of the row is going to be scaled up slightly so that the items, placeholder items, let's actually get these items back. So I'm just copying over some of my test data into the actual kind of root of the app here so that I can see what this looks like visually. Gallery test data there. Cool. So we can see that. I'm just gonna, that's just way too big. So I'm just gonna scale that down. So I'm just fiddling with the numbers here just so I can get the result that I want. Could update these URLs as well. Cool, that's looking a little bit better. I'm using the image URL as the, so that's why it's coming up with that. Oh, it's those two there. I'll just tweak that a little bit to get rid of that. Cool. So what I'm aiming for here anyway is a test that basically says this one is untouched, this one at the end here, and these two here are stretched to the right-hand side. So I can see, I'll be able to visually test that in a moment. I can see what that looks like. Now that I've tweaked that test data, I'm going to copy that test data back to my test here. Now, the thing now is to set up the expectations here so that my test fails. So we've got a passing test. My goal at the moment is to make this test fail, so that then I can write the code that makes that failing test pass. So I'm gonna get rid of that expectation there. First row, I'm going to expect that the length of that, sorry, the items in that first row be 2. And I'll do a similar thing here for the second row. That should be 1 item. So this should still be passing because that's still. So I'm going to take out item 1 from the first row. And what I'm expecting here is that the width of this is greater than, because I'm expecting this to be scaled up. I'm expecting the width of this to be scaled up from the original item here. So it's greater than item 0.width. And of course this should fail because there's no kind of scaling or no sort of changes being made to these. The height will be scaled up as well because the height needs to be scaled up in order to scale up the width. I'm expecting this same sort of thing to happen to item 2 here. So pulling out item 2 in the first row. And what do I expect from the item in the second row? Pull out item 3. That's the first row in this, or sorry, the first item in the second row. Well, I'm expecting it to be exactly the same, right? So the width of it should not be scaled. So this is what I'm saying. This is a feature of this thing, is that it's not going to scale. So it's going to be the same as the third item from our original gallery list of items. Same with the height here. This should give me a failing test. It expected greater than 240 and it received 240. So that's why the test is failing. Now this is where the layout algorithm is going to get a little bit more complicated again. So what I have to do here is, after I've assigned all my items to particular rows, I'm going to go through and, well, for all rows except the last row, stretch the items towards the right-hand boundary. So it helps to write a nice comment there. I mean, that's kind of useful later if you're trying to understand what you've done here in the code. But this is also helping me getting my kind of understanding straight of like what I'm trying to, of the code that I'm trying to write here. Now, one thing I want to do is I want to be able to modify each item without touching the original source data. That's going to be important here, I think. So what I'm going to do is, I'm just at this point here, when I'm assigning each item to each row, I'm going to clone the item using object.assign. And it's the clone that I'm going to push into each row. Just type some nice comments here so I can remember later how all this works. Okay, so this is where I'm doing it. This is where I'm going to stretch each item. So I'm going to be working across each of the rows that I've created. So I've got a for loop here to work through my rows. I'll pull out the row. I need to know the width of each row. I should add that to each row, but I'm just going to, for the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to compute that again here. So for each item, sorry, that should be a for of loop. For item of row, or dot items. Careful where you get things wrong. Actually, at this point, I kind of know that's going to be wrong, actually, because this is not the computed width. If you'll remember before here, we've got a computed width that we use to kind of rescale each image. We're not recording that anywhere. So at this point, I think I'm actually going to have to save that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to overwrite the width of the item that I'm cloning with the computed width and the height with the target row height. So that will be the new width and height of each item. And so here I can rely on that width coming through as that kind of rescaled version of the image and computing the row width based on that. And this should also be like, this should be cached earlier, really. I'm going to do that later though. I'll worry about that a little bit later. I've got my gallery. You can see I've got my gallery width as a parameter up here. This create layout function. I need to know the gap between the gallery width and the actual row width that I've got here. And the amount of, I need to know the amount that I need to grow each item. I'll call that delta width. So that's the gap divided by the number of items. Now I can expand each item to fill that gap. Let's write a loop here. Now at this point, I'm going to need to know the aspect ratio of the item. Actually, I've already computed that. I was going to recompute that here, but I realized I've already got that up here. So I've got the aspect ratio computed. I just need to cache that. So let's put that, let's add that to each item, and then I can rely on that down here. Now I want to increase the width of the item by the gap. So now this is where I need the aspect ratio. So now that I've got the width, I can recompute the height from that aspect ratio and from the new width. 1 over aspect ratio. So it's the inverse of what I was doing to compute the width earlier. So let me just kind of reread this code quickly and make sure I know what it's doing. Here's the original code where I'm assigning items to rows, and we're wrapping, when we get bigger than the maximum row width, gallery width, we wrap to the next row. I'm now cloning each item because I want to record the computed width and the target and the height of each item. And I'm also storing here the aspect ratio, which I need in the next part of this algorithm. And I'm pushing the clone on the list of items for each row. And then after I've assigned all the items to rows, I'm doing a loop over all the rows here, computing the width of each row. This is something that I can hash in the previous loop. I don't even use that. What did I add that for? Oh, I'm using the wrong thing there. So that is what I need to add to each width. Good thing I reread my code and checked it. Otherwise, I wouldn't have noticed that problem. So is this going to get me a passing test? That's the question. Something wrong with my code. Type error. Cannot read properties of undefined. Oh, I can see immediately that this thing that's supposed to be a row is called rows. Where is that? So we're computing the delta width, and then for each item we're expanding the width of each item out to close that gap, and then we're recomputing the height of the item based on the item's aspect ratio, or the inverse, I should say, the inverse. Almost got a passing test. There's some things coming through now that I'm not accounting for in some of my earlier tests. So what I'm going to do at this point is I'm just going to focus on the one test that I'm trying to get working, which is this last one. I'll remove this expectation. I don't need that. But what I want to do is I just want to focus in on this test here. So I'm just going to copy the name of that test. And this is a great way to focus in on a particular test, is to use the T argument to jest, to tell it which test. Just to put quotes around that. Let me fix that. So I'm just focusing in on this one particular test, and I want to make sure it passes. I suspect that it's passing. Didn't really kind of get to pick that out of the output before. I expect that it's passing. So, oh wow, I'm close. It's like a precision issue or something. I've got this funny little precision issue where it's just, my scaling is just off by a little bit. This is actually on item 3. I want to basically stretch all rows except for the last one. And that was what this was meant to do, actually. This -1 here, that was what that was meant to do. That was meant to not touch the last row. Add a little bit of console logging here to see what's actually happening here. So it's getting to row 0, but it's not touching row 1. So that must be the original computed width up here that's just a little bit off. Okay, I'm gonna put this down to a precision issue. What I want here is I want to be almost, or to be close to. Let's Google it. Let's Google it and see what. How to check strict equality of floating point close to what I want. Oh, you know what? I could do it with just an epsilon value. Number of epsilon. So that's a constant in JavaScript that you can use for things like this. I think it might have been with mocker. Like when I used to use mocker, there was like a function that was like to be close to or something like that could be used for these issues with floating point precision. I have to try and later on find out if there's something like that for jest. Is epsilon not big enough here? Let's just make this number a little bit more extreme, and it's the width we're talking about here. Oh no, now it's no. That was fine. It's onto the height now. So let's just say 0.001. Let's see if that gets us a passing test. So it should be like it shouldn't be greater than, it should be like, you know, close to. That works. I have to kind of go the other way though as well and say it's less than that. So this is what I mean by I'm testing that the number is close to another number, because it's really hard to get good precision on floating point numbers. Cool, so that's good. Now let's go back to testing all my tests, and I'll see what tests I've broken with this change. Yep, so I'm expecting a whole bunch of fields to come through in other tests. Yep, because some of these things have been scaled up now. But I've got to look at my test and I've got to think about, you know, am I trying to test too much with each one? Like for instance, in this one, I'm really only testing that, you know, a single item comes through. I don't really care about the width or the height on this one, even though this test isn't failing anyway. The overflow one is failing. The multiple items one, or the single item one is. I'm just going to refine this test a little bit, because in this test, like, I don't care about these things that it's failing on. So this test is just a little bit fragile. All I want to know is that rows.length is 1, so that a single item comes through in a single row, and in this row there should be only one item. What am I doing? So there's one item, and the item, just pull out the item here. Let's expect that the thumb of the item is equal to our original. That doesn't work, does it? I've got this item up here, and I've got this item here. So say expected item. Let's just index directly into the row. That'll be easier than trying to pick up an out of this thing. So if I'm right, that should fix this test. So I'm testing the same thing. That's the same thing that I was testing before. I'm just more restrictive about which values that I'm looking at, which makes this test less fragile. So I've got 3 failing tests. If this works, I should have just 2 failing tests, hopefully. And I have to make the same kind of changes to my other tests here to work through that. So same here. I'm not really caring about testing for this aspect ratio that's coming through. What I want to know here is that I can lay out a gallery with multiple items on a single row. So same as above, rows.length should be 1. I'll pull out the row, and I will expect that rows.items.length is equal to 3 here, so the 3 items. And if I want to, I can check the thumb of each. So let's do that. Just to make sure that, just to verify that they're laid out in the same order that we expect them to be in. Don't need that expectation. So if this works, I should be down to 1 failing test. Oh, I'm still on 2 failing tests. Oh, I've indexed these things totally wrong. There you go. Okay, yep, cool. I'm down to 1 failing test. So get this test fixed. Same issue, really. It's just these values coming through that I'm not interested in testing. All I want to do, as the name of this test says, is that I want to test that the 3rd item gets overflowed here to the 2nd row. So this time around, I'm expecting that there's 2 rows. And I'll pull out 1st row, 2nd row. I can expect here that the 1st row has 2 items, and with the 2nd row here has 1. That's basically the main thing I want to test, but again I can test that the thumb, each one is the same to make sure that there's no issues copying that through. So the 1st row matches the first 2 items, and the 2nd row matches that 3rd item. Make sure I get my indexes right, get rid of the expectation that I don't want, and fingers crossed this will give me the pass tests. Cool. So now we're going to actually check the visual version of this and check the gallery lines up with the right-hand side. That's the example I had before. I'm just going to comment about that. I'll go back to my test data. Fingers crossed there's no bugs with this. See this gallery in all its glory. And it's just completely not what I expected. What have I got wrong here? Well, I might have to leave this till the next session anyways. We have passing tests. Gallery has failed really to get rid of these ugly gaps here. I think this one lines up just by accident. But that's going to be a problem that I'm going to solve next week. Already over time. So we will continue this test-driven development next week. We'll figure out what's causing this gallery not to kind of line up. Code that I wrote looked like it should have worked, but doesn't mean it will work. So please check out the page for Rapid Fullstack Development. That's the new book that I'm writing. Would love to get your eyes on it. Read the first chapter for free online. Check out Twitter as well. I'll be on Twitter and notifying you of when my next live stream is. Or you can follow me on Twitch as well to get notifications of when I go live. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next week.